Hello, Space here, and I might have just unraveled one of the greatest mysteries in Zelda history. Of course, probably won't be long until I'm proven right or wrong, because it has a lot to do with the upcoming sequel to Breath of the Wild. But if you want to be ahead of the game, this is the place to be. From here on out, we're going to be in spoiler and potential spoiler territory, so only venture forth if you dare. Ever since the most recent trailer for the Breath of the Wild sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, I've had millions of questions. Who is the owl figure in the mural? What's the deal with the double dragon logo? Why is the ground flying? Well, today I have probably the answers to most of them. I've done a ton of research and I spent ages analyzing the new trailers for the sequel. Journey with me back in time as we begin to understand just where the story of Tears of the Kingdom is going. We begin with the game that Tears of the Kingdom is a sequel to, Breath of the Wild. In this video, I'm going to talk a lot about the Zonai, which many of you may already be expecting, but that's because there are some very strong connections which I will be making in a bit. Before I do so, there are some things I want to establish, including the specific imagery, cultural references, and design languages that will make up the premise of this theory. First and foremost, let's establish what we know that connects the Zonai. Number one, the cultural references. Let's begin by looking at the Zonai ruins, the colloquial namesake of the tribe. Most Zonai architecture references either Southeast Asian culture and its engraved walls, or Aztec culture with the statue heads, or other general stylistic similarities. Number two, the design language. Because Zonai ruins reference specific real-world cultures, there is a design language that can be associated with them. The rounded squares used to shape many designs, not to mention various usages of repetitive patterns revolving around squares. Specific small details like these are what are often used to connect ruins to the Zonai by people like myself. Of course, this is different than the specific imagery. The way animals like dragons, pigs, and owls appear is very unique and particular to the Zonai. Not to mention the swirls, specifically this swirl with a tick on the end. Furthermore, the usage of the twin snake, or perhaps twin dragon, that is so common amongst Zonai architecture. I hope this is starting to kick up some ideas. One important thing to note about the Zonai is that they seemingly worship the Tribe Force, not unlike the Sheikah. Why do we say that? Because we have architectural evidence that tells us so. Again, we see depicted by the Zonai, dragons, technically also snakes but same difference, which represent the Triforce part of courage, pigs, which represent the Triforce part of strength, and owls, which represent the Triforce part of wisdom. Pig architecture, however, is unique in that it seems very separated and taken down, but we'll have to return to that at the end of the theory. Now, Breath of the Wild undoubtedly has way more to say on the Zonai than the way their architecture looks, but for now, I'm going to leave it at that. By the end of this theory, why I do so will hopefully make some more sense. It should also be noted that Creating a Champion, a massive Breath of the Wild lore dump book, calls the Zonai strong magic users. Just keep that in mind, but I'll explain it more later. Now that we've talked about Breath of the Wild, let's talk about some of the other games on the Zelda timeline, in particular, Twilight Princess. Now, if you have an hour and a half to burn, I would highly recommend going to watch Nintendo Black Crisis' video, Who Are the Zonai? A Breath of the Wild documentary. That video explains what I'm about to explain way better than I even want to. It's way more in depth, so I would highly recommend that. But allow me to summarize the points I wanted to be taken away here. First of all, there are some similarities in design language between two tribes in particular, the Zonai and the Twilight. In particular, note the rounded squares on the throne of Zant, the ruler of the Twilight. It's not the strongest connection on its own, but it's not on its own. The Mirror of Twilight is another important detail here. Notice on the back, oh, what's this? Twin dragons! Just like in Zonai architecture. What a funny coincidence. Secondly, the video does an excellent job of summarizing a theory on why it is that the Ooccoo? Sky people, also from Twilight Princess, could very well be the same as the Twilight, which would seemingly imply that at one point they were one species. There's too many details there and I'm lazy, so just trust me on this one, or better yet, go watch the original video, it's in the description. If I were to give any details, however, I would probably just note that it includes a lot of the same ideas that we included in the Zonai connections visually. Specific imagery, design language, and cultural references, may they be much less common. There's plenty more to unpack there, but there's just a couple things that I want you to keep a note of for the rest of the theory. Number one, the entirely possible likelihood that the Zonai are in fact related to the Twilight, or at least the banishment of the Twilight. Number two, it seems very likely that the Twilight are, in fact, both people of the Twilight realm and the sky. which is to say that the Zonai are split between these two realms. Just keep those ideas in mind as we move forward. That's enough talk about the old games. Let's get to the juice. Let's talk about that first reveal trailer. Now, for a while, there was some debate over who the zombie was in the first trailer, and I personally thought it was Demise. However, I was proven wrong very quickly on a deeper analysis of the trailer. On the mural that Zelda holds a torch of, we can very clearly see a warrior with a trident on horseback. There's no way that isn't Ganondorf. The only character ever in the Zelda series that's held a trident the way that that character is has been Ganondorf, or at least Ganondorf in his big old pig form, but that's all there is to it. And oh, wait, what's this? Easily identifiable Zonai architecture. Huh, what's that doing at Ganondorf's grave? And why does it seem like the whole temple is Zonai? And what's that eye on his forehead? And oh, look, the arm. It has a repetitive series of squares that look similar to the design language of Aztec culture. Could it be? We'll come back to this. I do also want to note what the text looks like swirling out of the arm in this trailer. While as far as I know, there is no connection between this text and past games, it will show up again in other trailers, so pay attention for that. Lastly, the music is very unique here, and the reverse voices only come up again once in the second trailer. I'll elaborate on my thoughts on this later, but do also note that when the trailer is played in reverse, the music does seem to have someone whispering, "Please help me." Might have to listen hard a couple times, but it is there. The second trailer probably has the least information out of the three, but the information is vital nonetheless. Firstly, don't forget about Link's new ability, jumping through the walls and ceilings, which seems to come from his arm, connecting that power to the Zonai, theoretically. Secondly, note the square stones in that big old creature in that quick shot. Personally, it reminds me of the repetitive square motif of the Zonai still, but I could be wrong about that. Lastly, in the version of this trailer that came around when they announced the delay of the game, note also the golden orb, the script on the ground similar to the first trailer, and the fact that both the Master Sword and Link's new arm react to the orb. Huh. Weird. And more squares on Link's shoulder. Now notice that the music in this trailer also includes the reversed voices. In neither trailer does it play any particular theme, but instead simply seems to be reversed voices for the sake of conveying something else, like the reversal of time, which has already been seen in the trailer when Link reverses the giant metal ball. Now the last trailer is where things get really juicy. That mural is everything. Let's take it step by step. In the first shot, notice that the figure looks most like an owl. What owls do we have in Zelda? Ones that represent wisdom. Who else represents wisdom? Zelda, and by proxy, Hylia. My thought is that this is a representation of Hylia as portrayed and seen by the Zonai. That's speculation though. Now, the rest of the mural. Immediately there's a connection to be made to the Twili and Zonai, the rounded squares around and behind the figure. Furthermore, the orbs, which I will be calling tears. They have an imperfect resemblance to the swirl with the tick seen in lots of Zonai architecture. But wait, what would Hylia be doing with Zonai things? We'll get there. The second shot displays several things I want to talk about. First of all, there are two oddly shaped boxes at the top of the shot. What are they? I literally have no idea, but I bet they're important. My thought is that they are some sort of large mechanical creature, particularly Divine Beast Faruda or Naboris. Second of all, note that there is no clear identifier on who the people are. They could be Hylian, pointy ears and shields, or they could be Rito if you see the ears as a beak. Or they could be something that we haven't seen before, the Zonai. But since we have no idea what they look like, with the only example that we have being the Sky People and Twilight, we can't see that for sure. The third shot displays... The third shot is the one that I said was first. That's my bad. The fourth shot displays a person floating. Note the eye on the person's head. Who else do we know is something like that? Zombie Ganondorf. Boom. There it is. There's your answer. They show up again intertwining hands with who we see at the end of the trailer to be the same Hylia as in previous shots. Also note that, in that final shot, there are two tears facing each other, further implying their alliance. And hey, on the right there's the same text as the swirly stuff. Okay, this has got to be a Zonai mural. One brief sort of side theory here, note that the islands all end off in that odd pole shape, the same one connecting the boulders Link is riding upwards. This would seem to imply that the way Link gets up to the isles is by using these boulders, but is confused by the question of how Link is meant to climb at the angle under the island. Of course, that would be easy with magic that allows you to travel through ceilings, which Link has, and we think is Zonai based. So it really seems like, if that's true, that the Zonai are the ones that made the islands. Now, there's not too much more to unpack here, but there is plenty. For example, twin dragons galore. On the big door, on the logo, that's Zonai imagery, baby! We see that Link has little teal vials, but we don't see their function. Perhaps they're for his time abilities or his wall penetration abilities. I said penetration. But nothing is confirmed here as far as I can tell. Lastly, note the massive glowing runes on that far rock. You know what that looks like? Zonai stuff. Speaking of the Zonai, let's start putting some hard answers on questions here. Who am I saying the Zonai are? It's my theory that the Zonai are an ancient people that split off into the Sky People and the Twilight. This would make sense because of the similarities in design language and specific imagery between the Twilight and the Zonai. I believe the Zonai were once a proud and successful tribe that worked alongside the Sheikah, and that something happened to them before the first calamity that resulted in their extinction. We also believe that the Zonai were strong magic wielders, which is to say that the Sheikah very likely benefited through an alliance with them, in that there's a possibility the Zonai helped with everything from the Sheikah towers to the shrines. Alright, so what's the point here? Why do we need to talk about the Zonai in order to understand Tears of the Kingdom? Obviously there's a lot of strong connections, but what part are they actually going to play? Allow me to summarize all of the evidence into a single theory for you. Hyrule conquered the Zonai with the help of Ganondorf before the first calamity. Let's unpack that. As a reminder, we believe the owl figure in the newest trailer to be Hylia, the zombie to be Ganondorf, and the Zonai to be the original Twilight and Sky People. In addition to that, we have to believe that this took place before the first calamity, because in the mural that depicts the first calamity, the Zonai are nowhere to be seen. In the beginning, the Zonai and the Sheikah were two separate people. The Sheikah came to the Zonai because of their talents with magic, as the Sheikah attempted to create new, better weaponry. Together, the Sheikah and Zonai formed the Mirror of Twilight, used for banishing evil from Hyrule, but the Zonai had no interest in creating weapons. Eventually, the Sheikah grew tired of not being able to take advantage of this massive resource and sought a way to destroy them and take their magic. In some fashion, they were successful and managed to steal a few tears from the Zonai, but this wasn't enough. Enter Ganondorf. Ganondorf desired to bring about the calamity and found an ancient magic that brought to life the bokoblins and all the other mystical monsters that can be found around Hyrule. He turned them into an army and went to destroy both Hyrule and the Zonai. But the Sheikah saw his power and decided to work with him to conquer the Zonai. Ganondorf, who had likewise stolen tears from the Zonai to use as his own power, agreed, withholding his desire to destroy Hyrule so as to gain an upper hand against the Zonai. But this backfired. The Zonai used their magic to capture Ganondorf and trap him eternally, but doing so left a great weakness, and the Sheikah took advantage of this, using the Mirror of Twilight to banish as many Zonai to the Twilight Realm as possible. But some Zonai escaped. Some Zonai began developing new magic that would allow them to live far above Hyrule in the sky. They developed magic alongside this to allow them to travel between Hyrule and the land above. They hid for thousands of years underground, waiting for Hyrule to go quiet so that they could ascend, and now, with Ganondorf awakening, we will see the birth of the Sky People, as these ancient people will rise to escape the new calamity. It all lines up. It all makes sense. It explains why the pig statues that the Zonai made are so much more few and far between, not to mention how they're so destroyed, since the Zonai hated Ganon. It explains why there are Sheikah and Zonai crossovers like the Great Big Labyrinths. It leaves very few questions, if the information is correct. I also want to acknowledge a potential alternative theory. What if the mural in the new trailer isn't depicting the past, but the future? What if it's a prophecy? What if we're actually seeing the eventual union between Demise and Hylia that will finally end this eternal cycle? It's entirely possible for this to be true, and honestly, with the idea that the Zonai were actually the Twilight and Sky People, nothing necessarily changes. The Zonai and Sheikah once worked together and created the Mirror of Twilight still, but the Sheikah used it against them and split the people in two. The Zonai still defeated Ganondorf, perhaps with the help of the Sheikah. There's not really any space where these two ideas necessarily disagree, and perhaps that is the point. Drawing parallels, creating duality, it's so common in these trailers, and having both the past and future be important fits into that. So that's a theory. Well, it's a couple theories actually, but it has a lot of basis, which makes me very excited in it. But it's not perfect. Lots of the evidence can be argued as circumstantial, and the logic I use is simply one or two ways of connecting the dots, not a definitive proof. But I will say, good luck proving me wrong, because I've looked at a lot of evidence and I've found nothing that can disprove these theories. That's the video. I want to do more video essays for sure, so don't not subscribe just because I haven't done any yet. I already have ideas for video essays on the TV show Toradora and Marvel movies, not to mention ones I want to make on the concept of art criticism and the story and morals of Breath of the Wild. These do take a lot more to make than the normal short form content I do though, so there'll be a lot more few and far between. I also make music. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment below if you have more evidence you have yet to see considered. I know there's a lot in this video I didn't cover, and anyone who has specific, important details is more than welcome to contribute. I want to do less work. If you have alternate theories, this is a great space to put those as well. Fight me on this, prove me wrong. I want to be right, but that can mean being wrong and learning why. Anyway, that's just about everything. So thank you for watching and see you next time. Peace.